Today on Lightning Bugs.
How advanced is a species that systematically destroys its own habitat?
Yeah.
How advanced is a species that spends much more of its resources on ways to kill each other than ways to heal each other? You spend too much time awake and too much time asleep. Your waking hours should be more dreamy and your sleeping hours should be more wakeful. I think we have really suffered in our culture from the cacophony of noise that assaults us 24 hours a day. Why would the human mind be any different than the rest of nature? I mean, during winter, nature is planning spring. Youth is the time to individuate. That's the function of youth. The problem in a society is when youth is not rebellious. That's when you have a problem.
Hello and welcome to Lightning Bugs, conversations with me, Ben Folds, about creativity. Today's guest, man, if I'm going to read even her bio, we're going to be here longer than the podcast is going to be. Such an incredible career. 13 books. She's on her 14th book. She ran for president. She ran for Congress. She's inspired millions. Marianne Williamson. That's my guest today. She had 4 number one New York Times bestsellers in that group, even if it was just writing. And that's all she did, but she lectures. Project Angel Food has delivered now more than 13 million meals to ill and dying homebound patients since 1989. It's 13 million meals. She's certainly doing what she's practicing what she preaches, with leaving the world a better place than she found it. Something you might not know. She used to be a singer. It was brief. She wanted to sing cabaret when she was younger, so in her 20s. So the question is can Folds make Williamson sing on his podcast? Listen and find out. Also, celebrity spiritual smackdown. Let's find out who wins the Google off over Leonard Cohen's age. You'll hear all these things next on Lightning Bugs. 1, 2. Hey, it's an honor to talk to you again. We spoke briefly for Arts Vote 2020 about creativity and the arts, and you were secretly you were our best guest.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
And I thought that was you. I actually asked Wendy, but she must not have realized that. I said, I think I spoke with him. Yeah, I remember that. Great to talk to you again.
Yeah, you too. So this podcast is about creativity. I'm really interested in your creativity and your process as much as I am about your thoughts and wisdom on creativity and spirituality together. So I might concentrate more on you, just to let you know. What you're working on right now? I mean, it's been like, 2 years since you released a book? That probably seems like an eternity at this moment.
Right. Well, I have a podcast, and I'm recording the daily lessons of A Course in Miracles. And I write for Newsweek a couple of times a month.
Yep,
and I have a book that will be due at the end of the year that I always say you have to be pregnant with a book before you start to write it. So it hasn't started writing yet itself. As Hemingway would say, you put down the pencil if the story stops writing itself, you put down your pencil. So I'm still in that pregnant phase with it. It's gestating. But I know that you know, with your extraordinary work, that your creativity, it is like the gestation and pregnancy. It lives inside you before labor begins.
Do you hit a point where you force it with the pen and just go, you know what? Part of the gestation is just going to have to be, I'm just going to write slibby-libby-libby until something comes forward? No, I think Hemingway said it. If the story stops writing itself, put down the pencil. Some people see it differently. Some people say you write every day, no matter what. Although I have to say, I feel like Twitter and social media, writing on Instagram, sometimes I feel like it's an artist's notebook, you know? So I do feel that just doing that, I'm sort of keeping my brain and fingers busy. I have great respect for what occurs in the silence.
And I know it's not nothing. Just because something's happening inside doesn't mean it's not happening. Martin Luther King once said, don't misunderstand our passivity. We are, what did he say? We are materially passive, but we are spiritually active. And sometimes when somebody's just sitting there thinking, a lot's going on.
Reminds me of the Neil Young song. I don't know the name of it, but the one that goes, there's a lot to learn from wasting time. You know that one?
Yeah,
I love that line.
I don't know that particular song, although I love him.
It was a terrible imitation, sorry.
You did pretty good, actually. Blaise Pascal said every problem in the world can be sourced, is rooted in man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. I think we have really suffered in our culture from the cacophony of noise that assaults us 24 hours a day.
I agree, and that's why I'm kind of impressed with your more positive take on activity on Twitter, because I think most of me and most of my friends that make things probably feel like time spent on Twitter is actually, it offloads some of our creative energy, and it should be going into a song or a book or something, and instead we're sitting here on Twitter, but you're looking at it as a little notebook.
I see it both ways. I think both things are true. I saw a tweet actually from Anand Girdidas the other day saying, I noticed not being on social media, I'm getting more written in my book. What a coincidence. I see it both ways.
Yeah.
Because even though there is an addictive quality, there's no doubt about it. And I'm, as much as anyone else, needing to say, put that thing down. Put that thing down. Because
Totally.
that exists. But there is something else that exists too. And that is that people who are very intelligent and have some really smart things to say, who don't have anywhere else to put it out into the world. And you're missing something if you're not listening to them sometimes. People whose ideas wouldn't necessarily get through the vetting of the cultural gatekeepers, but who sometimes, even in their despair, even if I remember a few nights ago, I actually started crying. I was watching the analysis that people were doing of what it would mean in their lives between $1,400 and $2,000.
Wow.
I was informed by that, to see the level of, and how these people were very smart, by the way, the kind of analyzing that they were doing and things that they were putting together, and they had to pay for this and they had to pay for that. So there's something, it's today's version of spending enough time on the street.
Yeah. No, I think I love that. That's a refreshing, positive outlook on that. I mean, because it is more complex than just, well, it's wasting my time, I'm spending time on it. And people don't usually see it that way. I'm also interested in, back to your silence and Hemingway's putting the pen down. I think I've probably talked to more artists who advocate for almost office hours, and that's never been my way of doing it. I've always had a hard time with that. I do get it written eventually, but I've just never gone for the 9 to 5 and hope that I just kind of shit it out in that time.
And also, that's just post-industrial nonsense anyway. That's completely artificial. Those were not the office hours of our ancestors who were going by the phases of the moon and the phases of the sun. I'm amused by how often when you do get on, let's say, something like Twitter at 3:30 and 4 in the morning, it's so clear that's when everybody's up. So,
I know, yeah.
I remember reading in a book many years ago, it actually was in a Seth book by Jane Roberts, and he said, you spend too much time awake and too much time asleep. Your waking hours should be more dreamy, and your sleeping hours should be more wakeful. And he was talking about the Mediterranean cultures where they take a siesta in the afternoon. He said that's when you should be down because your blood sugar is low. There's no reason to be plowing through. And he says at night when the negative ions are in the air, you're missing some of the best hours. So
I think so. I mean, it always has felt to me that the static kind of kind of clears up a little bit. Remember when I was a kid listening to a transistor radio, and for some reason you could catch stations, 90 miles away. The only time you could get those was at midnight. And I've always kind of felt the same way about creativity. That's suddenly when sort of my creative mind wakes up is in the middle of the night.
Absolutely. Yeah. You hear how quiet the world, we think we dwell in quiet, but we're not really, you don't really know quiet until it's the middle of the night, or sometimes you get that feeling on weekends. Or I know when I lived in Michigan and the first big snowfall would come, and the next morning it's like the snow made everything quiet. And I didn't realize, you think you know what quiet is. This is quiet. And there's no doubt about it. The shrieking of the ego mind that is constantly assaulting us, not only from our own misperceptions, but from the freneticism and the fear and the chaos of the world today. And the creative voice is a quieter voice, and it won't force itself on you. You have to make room for it.
Do you find yourself writing, when you're writing a book, in the middle of the night, or
a lot of that?
Do you have
Absolutely. When I'm in those last days, and every writer, I'm sure you yourself are very aware of this phenomenon, when it just won't stop. You get in that phase. Sometimes it's 18, 20 hours a day. I mean, you just can't stop. And it's an exhilarating, somewhat painful, but still exhilarating flow in the middle of the night. Absolutely. I think most people underestimate the power of their own subconscious mind. Mm-hmm. My subconscious mind is very clear that I have a deadline at the end of this year. I trust in that.
Okay. So behind the scenes, your subconscious is aware it's got to come out. So it's working at night and day when you're daydreaming and processing all that stuff somewhere at the back or front of your head.
Why would the human mind be any different than the rest of nature? I mean, during winter, nature is planning spring.
Right. Yeah. No, I really like your, I think it's real helpful for people to have real basic nature metaphors like that. I mean, one of your recent is Newsweek, right? Columns was basically treating the U.S. as looking at it like a body that had to recover an immune system that had kicked in, and it's that seems pretty unimpeachable to me. Anytime you refer to nature, it really is hard to explain how humankind can possibly be the only animals and force out there that is not beholden to nature.
I think people are beginning to realize, it's beginning to dawn on the consciousness of the modern human being, the arrogance and the aberrational nature of the last era of history, in which we thought that we were somehow different than the rest of nature. We worked differently. We weren't like the trees. We were like the machines. Really?
Yeah.
Really? Really? I don't think so. And that very idea so fractured us from essential truths of who we are and what it means to live righteously on the planet. And we've suffered terribly from this fracture. And we are suffering terribly, and I think people are realizing if we don't make the correction, then we could suffer in ways that are so calamitous that the human race would actually not repair and not be able to pull back from the brink.
You always point out the positivity or that we're on a trajectory where people are more enlightened now as a species than we were 10 years ago and 100 years before that. And I'm always really impressed with some of the thinkers and how much more intelligent my kids are than I was at their age in certain ways. But at the same time, how do you explain the duality of it's like we're up here in one way, and then we're seeing like the dark ages, like I've never thought about before. Do you think that there's just a consistency? Like there has to be just enough dumb and evil, and there has to be just enough good and kind?
Well, I think two things. I think we're arrogantly naive to think we are more enlightened. I think we will be looked back on as a less enlightened period of time. And unless the modern Western world, our disconnection from nature, our disconnection from what is essentially truth, this will not be looked back on as an enlightened moment. This will be looked back at a very unenlightened, dark chapter. The first chief of staff, staffs of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, first chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said, and of course this was after the use of the atomic bomb, he said, we are technological giants and ethical infants. If you look at indigenous cultures, what we call advanced societies today, and then what we call certain indigenous cultures, and we would see them as not advanced societies, I think spiritually people are beginning to realize how much more advanced it is. How advanced is a species that systematically destroys its own habitat? Yeah. How advanced is a species that spends so many much more of its resources on ways to kill each other than ways to heal each other and to further life? How advanced are we really? And I think that that's the question that people are asking. Now, when you talk about your child, I certainly agree with you. I think every generation stands on the shoulders of the one before it. So the places where we're getting it right, yes, our children are inheriting the wisdom and the accumulated knowledge. But I think what's good about youth today...
We're going up, as you see, at any rate.
Well, yeah, in some ways we are. But in certain ways, you see young people today recognizing how many of the patterns that are now well established and entrenched are things they need to cut the cord with. I mean, that's what any person who in their individuation process, and any generation in its individuation process, sees what came before, says, where do I like it? Where is it good? Where do I want to build on that? And where is it something where I need to interrupt the chain right now and not hand that down to my kids? You have a younger generation today that were not even born in this century.
I know.
Or who, even if they were born in the century, were not 20th century beings. And they should not be, and they know this, they should not be tied to bad ideas from the 20th century. And I think that the real work to do today, the real inquiry, is not just where we got it wrong, but where we got right. Not just where we got it right, but where we got it so terribly, terribly wrong.
I worry about the baby in the bathwater syndrome, though, where I feel like there's some things that, for instance, in music, I'm just now, like, as a rock musician, I wasn't supposed to accept anything that the generation before had to tell me, because they weren't making.
You had some good music.
That's right.
Because I was that generation. Don't throw away Bob Dylan and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
Exactly. But I think what, and actually it's more micro than that. It's more like the people right before me. So sort of like disco came right before I came in, I looked back and thought, okay, well, everything that's happening right now needs to get thrown out. I love that kids, or a newer generation, are throwing out some of the old and are shutting down some of those patterns. But for instance, one that would bother me is if you're going to enact social change, and that's an amazing thing to interrupt some of the awful patterns that we had going, it doesn't seem to leave room often for redemption. In other words, if you're an older person who has said and done some terrible things, the younger generation is going to go medieval on your ass, as they should. But I almost feel like they also need to possibly consider the possibility that there's growth even in older people, so that there can be some discussion. And I feel like it's not very forgiving. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, because what happens is a lot of the things that people need to be forgiven are things that they did when they were young. So before young people start judging old people, sometimes they need to ask how they're living on the planet themselves right now, and what things they might be doing that one day they will look back on and think we're not as reverent or devotional or as responsible as they might be. I think the older you are, the more you know certain things. And I think the younger you are, the more you know certain other things. I think that youth is the time to be rambunctious. Youth is the time to say, we're not going to do it the way they did it. Youth is the time to individuate. That's the function of youth. The problem in a society is when youth is not rebellious. That's when you have a problem. On the other hand, age is a time where you understand some things that you couldn't have understood before. And I read one quote from a woman who said, Youth is when you, no, youth is when you learn. Age is when you understand. And what does happen with age is that you see that things aren't black and white. You see that things are complicated. You realize life is more difficult and less simple and simplistic than you thought it was when you were young. You learn when you're older, in looking back, it gets very confusing. And people deserve forgiveness, and people deserve the capacity for redemption. And that's why I agree with you.
So let's turn our attention to questions, conversation from the Peanut Gallery. This one comes from Little Spiral. Suzanne, hit it.
Hey, Ben, this is Suzanne, aka Little Spiral. And I guess my question is, how do you get creatively unstuck?
Well, that's a very that's a huge and very succinct, amazing question. That is sort of what I'm trying to answer in however many hundreds of podcasts it might take, talking with all these creative thinkers and artists. Personally, as you might know, being someone who doesn't really believe in writer's block, in my memoir, I have a whole chapter about this called Follow the Brown. And what I mean by that is I realized when I came off of tour and my plumbing was yielding brown, rusty water, old building, old apartment, that I just had to turn it on and let it run until it ran clear. And it occurred to me that I don't often do that enough with my songs. And what I mean by that is that I don't allow the brown ideas. Like, I'm so ashamed sometimes that I'm going to make bad ideas that I just freeze up. But you have to let it run clear. That doesn't mean that it feels good to hear or observe your shitty ideas. It feels bad. But it's like any discipline. Sometimes it just, no pain, no gain. It kind of is like that. Some of the best writers I know, especially outside of music, authors are really big on office hours, which I think is a great thing, because the problem is if you don't start moving, it won't happen. And that said, we also have to know when it's time to take a break and listen to someone else. Listen to someone else's ideas, someone else's music. I remember reading a John Lennon interview where he was stuck. He felt very stuck, and he was someone who seemed to really push hard for a certain kind of idea. He was looking for, as I understand it, succinct poetry. He wanted that one or two words, like imagine. And that's so hard to find. He's tearing his hair out trying to do this. And you get stuck sometimes just simply by being over-disciplined, So with every answer, there is almost a contrary answer. Now, what he was saying, he did by accident one time, is he had to go out in a boat with some friends. I'm sure he would have rather stayed home and torn his hair out trying to finish his songs, but I've been there before. I was like, oh, okay, I have to go out with my friends to do a thing. So he jumped in this boat, and they ended up in a huge storm, and they felt like they were about to die. He came back home and he wrote 2 or 3 songs because it mixed his life up. I'm not saying go do something dangerous. I'm just saying that something different in his life that set off different feelings unstuck him. If it worked for John Lennon, might work for us too. There are also technique-oriented solutions. And those are, to me, making a map of what you've got. I'm a songwriter. So for me, like if you were making a screenplay or if you were making a building, whatever you're making, lay the parts out and leave all the blank spaces and see where you are. Because a lot of times when it comes to music, the techniques of how you repeat and you develop something are the answer. You've already got the idea. It's just that, like my idea might be dun, 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 dun. Really the answer is da, 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 da. The idea is there. It's taking that idea, realizing how to repeat it, turn it on itself. Because a lot of times we have too many ideas. So another thing besides just the esoteric idea of getting out of your head and going and doing something else, or locking yourself in a room as a matter of discipline, both those things could be effective. I'll leave you with one more thought, which is sitting on your hands and doing nothing in silence. It's very effective. It takes a lot of patience, not pushing. I saw a great documentary, and I'll have this man on my podcast. The maker of this documentary but the documentary was about Philip Glass. And Philip Glass said this bit that was huge for me. Maybe it's big for you. I don't know. I'll share it with you. He sits and waits for the tip of a boat to appear out of the haze, out of the mist. I think that's amazing. It's mist. It's a mystery. You don't know what's happening. And then you see a corner of a ship, and then you begin to document those things. That is one way to get unstuck, I think, too. Good luck with it, Suzanne. Keep at it. You make great stuff. I've heard it before. See ya.
Do you think that the understanding as you mature makes it more difficult to write on your subjects? For instance, I'll tell you, I used to just say stuff. The words were pretty, and I knew that I meant that, but I wasn't exactly sure what I was saying. Now, I still think they hold up. They're astonishingly on and wise a lot of times, but I didn't really understand it. I just felt it was probably true. But in your business, you're writing books that people are taking those words and living by them. Do you look back on your younger work and say, wow, that was a bold thing to say, and I wouldn't do that now?
I think part of being youthful is there's a bit of idiot savant in every young person. And that's the beauty of it. You don't know what there is to be afraid of yet. And you just let it out. And that's when some of your best work gets done. But things happen as you get older. And if I try to imitate that, it looks seedy. It looks cheesy.
It does. You're right.
When a 60-year-old
Seedy's
woman tries to imitate. You see it sometimes in pop music, and you're kind of like, oh, let it. I think with age, with every chapter of life, you have to allow yourself to grieve what is no longer yours in order to receive what is yours now. I might look at a young woman, and you see this with your creativity, you see it with your sexuality, you see it with everything. I don't have that anymore. But I don't have what she has anymore. But she doesn't have what I have yet. So, yeah, there are things that you don't have anymore. And also when you lose your anonymity. I mean, there's things I said and did when I was younger that if I were to say and do them again, they could be career ending just because, not only because of society's interpretation, by the way.
Yeah.
Not because of what they really are. And if a man said or did them, I think it would be very different in many cases. That's a whole other subject. But I think that there is a way in which you make a decision in life. What is the space you want to hold in a culture? If you are a person who has any kind of a creative persona, not just persona, but platform, and you decide, what am I willing to forego in order to hold the place I would like to hold? There are things I would say on social media that would be very funny, but they are jokes that don't jive with how I wish to be perceived.
Right.
So I'll say them to a friend, but I'm not going to say them. And that's not a lack of authenticity. It's
appropriate.
And I think with age, there's part of that too. When you're older, it's not cute anymore. It's not funny and cute anymore. It's different. I think, people talk about how people don't respect their elders these days, but I think that in order for elders to be respected, we have to act more respectable.
I agree.
And I think that what I sense is that young people are looking for elders and do want to feel that there are people who they can look to. But the older person has to assume a kind of internal position in order to be that.
Well, it's just not dignified.
Dignified, that's right. It's dignity.
Yeah, as you get older, and I think that's maybe some of the intergenerational gap in our time is maybe it's because almost all advertising and we worship youth so much that people get older and feel the need to affect youthisms that just really aren't them. And then how are the kids supposed to even relate to someone that's not being real? And that's that. I mean, do you think that as you get 13 books, like you're on this stack of books and accomplishment and all the different things that you've done in your time, do you find it's you have to fight fear of failure more? Is that something you think about more? Like in your youth, you just go, I got it. You're just throwing that stuff out there. But as you get older, I mean, because I think that I do. I think that when I put pen to paper now and I'm writing, I have to fight a fear of failing at it that I didn't have before. Like maybe I'm thinking too much.
Well, I've seen your resume, so I understand why you would. And I was thinking that about you and was going to say that before, which is you at your age could have that same fear. I think my fear is less, actually, than yours would be. Because I'm at the, fuck it, I'm just going to say what I really think years. Based on, Carl Jung said, the fear of, he said, the failure to deal with the subject of death robs the second half of life of its meaning. There's something happens when you reach the years where you can see the end on the horizon. Before those years, it's on the horizon, but you don't see it yet. But there's something that starts to happen when you're cleaning up the campsite. You hope you have some time, but you think about what you really want to make sure you say before you leave. But what you do before you leave, and it has very little to do with other people's opinion.
You think you put a number on that when, for most people, when that happens, like where maybe the fear would trickle off for most people, and then like where's farting in a bookstore, who gives a shit anymore?
Well, when I turned 50, I took turning 50 very hard, very hard. I couldn't believe how hard I took it. I didn't expect it, because your youth is irrevocably over. Yeah. Till the last day of your 49th year, you can still say to yourself, well, I'm still young. And then once at 50, you know you're not actually. So I remember saying at 50, I don't feel old yet, but I'm not young anymore either. 60 is a different marker, but you had 10 years to prepare for it. And 60 wasn't nearly as difficult for me as 50 because you also feel a real download of power. It's very parallel to and connected to the other things we were talking about. You're not young anymore, but you are something else. I see age like rooms in a big house. They're all really interesting rooms, but when you're in the room you're not in the room you used to be in anymore. And you're not in the room you're going to be in yet. You're in the room where you are. There's something so powerful in life about being where you are. And I do think you have to appropriately grieve what you aren't any longer.
I think that's key. That sounds really smart to me because, I talk to a lot of artists who the word failure comes up a lot, which is why I went ahead and brought it up with us, fear and failure. A lot of artists like to say, of all ages, that you should embrace your failure. I have a feeling you might frame it a little differently.
Well, the Course in Miracles says some of the things you thought were your greatest success were your greatest failures. Some of the things you thought were your greatest failures were your greatest success.
It's not up to you to determine this.
Well, look what we call success in our world today.
Yeah.
Billionaires who hardly pay any taxes and are making billions during this pandemic, while some people are suffering almost unimaginably, and we call that person a success.
Right.
So I think that it's part of the whole deeper moral and ethical and spiritual inquiry that so many people are making today has to do with what's successful. If you go to bed at night And somebody's life was a little better because of something I did or said. I showed up. I tried my best. I tried to be giving. I tried to, I tried to not, not indulge the weaker aspects of myself. I really tried to show up today.
Well, I think when you're talking to an artist many times, that what they are deeming failure is just a bad idea. Like, what if I'm writing and this horrible idea comes out? I think most people are so ashamed at swinging and missing at what they intended to do, or having a quote bad idea, that they often just don't have an idea at all, that their subconscious, like you say, is fairly intelligent and has decided not to tell them what the next idea is because they know that their ego is going to flip out.
Well, I think that's the point. It's your ego that flips out. You can't really know. Some of your, I don't think we're the best judge of how well we did sometimes. I had an experience many, many years ago where I was imagining, I had been to hear these cabaret singers, and I had heard these, I remember hearing a woman who I thought was absolutely incredible. I thought she was phenomenal. And I noticed nobody was really listening to her. Everybody was just talking, and nobody was listening. I was thinking, my God, this woman is incredible. Nobody gets it. And then I was in another room where people were going wild with applause over somebody whose work I thought was so gimmicky and so like, really? And I swore to myself then, if I am ever in a position of being on a stage with anything, I want to imagine that I'm in the back row and I'm impressed.
Right.
That I'm impressed. And
You're
I
the
think
original indie rocker.
Yeah, kind of actually, yeah. Would it pass muster with my parents who are long gone? Would it pass muster? That you start to. I think that the artist is here to serve the ages. I think the question, would it pass muster with my ancestors, is more important than would it pass muster with the bestsellers list or the cultural.
So it sounds like
elite.
to me you don't really judge and fear what you're doing. I mean, I think there are a lot of artists that do and a lot that don't. So we get through, like you pass your thing, but that's not something that you do. And I suppose the way that you help others get out of those ruts is just simply by pointing the rest of life out to them, hoping to center yourself personally. And in that way, someone can become more creative, because my job here is to kind of bring people on and to help illuminate what might get them out of their own ruts. Because I've just talked to so many people who are in creative ruts, who make things, and it sounds like to me, you practice what you preach. I don't detect someone that over edits while you're writing, even though you're a really good writer. I mean,
thank you. That's an honor to hear you say that. Nature is never in a rut. Look at nature. Look at flowers. Look at the seasons. Look at the weather.
I would see a desert when you say that, though. I'd be like, oh no, there's a desert.
Well, a desert isn't in a rut either. A lot's going on in a desert. There is no spot. Go into the wilderness. There is no, look at nature. Look at how look at a baby. Look at a child growing. Nature is never in a rut. Now, for those of us who have some foundation in a spiritual or a religious perspective, God is never in a rut. God, by however you understand him, whatever the name, whatever the Tao, the creative source, the divine intelligence, is never not there, is never not working. I might be in a rut, but God's not in a rut. So to the extent to which I say, use me, you are the faucet, you are not the water.
Right.
That's very different. If you see yourself as the faucet, then you have, the Course in Miracles would say, you have every reason to feel anxious and afraid. What can you create compared to starlight, planets, flowers, babies? You can't do any of that. But when you see yourself as service, use my hands, use my feet, use whatever talents I have, use whatever intelligence I have, use what I've learned from my successes, use what I've learned from my failures, use the wisdom I've gained from getting it right, use the wisdom I've gained from getting it wrong, use my shame, use my humiliation, use my embarrassment, use my suffering, because maybe, once you've suffered, you have more you have X-ray vision into the suffering of others. And you say, use everything I've been through and make it something beautiful for the world.
Do you have I don't know if you were prepped on this, but I'm doing something so far. I'm calling it New Week's Resolution, which is just creative thinkers on the podcast, giving us all a little resolution or an exercise creatively to do for the week. It could be read a little bit of poetry or anything. I have a feeling you might have something for us.
In order for the human race to survive and thrive, I think for another 100 years, we need to now create the largest social, spiritual, and political revolution in the history of the world. And I think each and every one of us has a part to play. And I think each and every one of us has gifts, skills, going back to what you and I said before, both where we failed as well as where we've succeeded. The only real failure is a situation you failed to learn from. Mm. And if each and every one of us on any given day says, I'll do what I can, I'll do what I can, then we'll make it. And if enough of us don't, we might not. There have been great civilizations that did crash and burn, that thought they were going to last forever, and they did not. And we need the humility. And that's another thing. When we were talking about how age and failure brings humility, we desperately need some humility as a culture. And if each of us is willing to learn not only the lessons of where we have gotten it wrong as well as where we've gotten it right, where our society has gotten it wrong as well as we've gotten it right, and really take that deep in, much with the help of artists, because that's what the artist function is. It helps us integrate all this and put it together in something that makes for something beautiful, then we will make it. And if each of us, that would be my hope for what we say to ourselves, that today I'll do what I can.
Do you think so? For my tiny mind, boiling it down to an exercise this week, can we make that into an exercise that something that we do or think over the course of the week? Like, I mean, some people are saying read a thing of poetry, and
yes, I like that line. I'll do what I can.
Okay.
I'll do what I can. There's a lot there. That's a bridge, I'm telling you.
No, it's
that's
a hit.
A line.
I like it.
Write it or write it. That's a line.
Do you have times that you're more hard on yourself? I mean, do you have like secretly chapters or speeches or anything that you go back to and go, stupid, stupid, stupid? Does it ever happen to you?
Of course. I think remorse is an important part of being human. I mean, only a sociopath feels no remorse, no regret. I have a lot of regrets about not fighting back harder during my presidential campaign. When I was so smeared, I should have given it right back. I should have, why didn't I just say, oh, let me tell you a few things, so I have, and other situations in my life where, I made a decision that years later, I wish I had made a different one, professionally and personally. Of course I do. And that's a large part also of age, because when you're younger, you probably have fewer regrets because you have less accumulated experience. But I think learning to forgive ourselves, to atone for our mistakes, ultimately, if you have a spiritual perspective, attacking yourself is as blasphemous as attacking anyone else. And you mentioned before redemption. You mentioned redemption, and I believe in that. I believe in the evolutionary process that is actually fostered by a willingness to admit where you have failed, to admit where you got it wrong. It makes you a more humble person. So anything, even our failures, can be used by God, because it makes you more humble, makes you more open to listening to what other people have to say. It makes you more generous to other people because you know how much mercy you really need yourself.
Maybe being hard on yourself is the wrong way to put it, but certainly being enough critical leads to more skill in what you do, certainly. I mean, like when I mentioned you're a good writer, the thing is when I first came across your writing, I guess was with your first book. My girlfriend made me read it. And I guess that was your first. I guess that was your first book.
Return to Love.
Return to Love. Actually, she wanted me to read A Woman's Worth, which must have been right after it. And I was a hard nut to crack, a southern guy in his 20s. So I went for the first book. But she had me read this other book of maybe a similar genre. I don't know what you call that. You're sort of on your own, but a general kind of help yourself sort of book. And the other book she'd given me, which I won't name, might have meant something, but it was so terribly written. It was like I just thought it was dross. So I was like, I'm not reading this crap. And then she gave me yours. I was like, okay, I can identify with this. Firstly, what you're saying makes sense to me, but also this person can actually write as a proper writer. And that came certainly by discipline at some point.
Well, my agent, who has since passed, said it was a course in writing. There were 4 years between, and I know you know this, it was 4 years between when I got the contract and when the book was published. It took much longer to write. And you know how this is. I'm sure in songwriting and everything that you do, it's much the same. You're hoping that you get a sentence that does well. You hope to have a paragraph. You hope to have a page. And that's what's so decrepit about the culture we live in. Everybody's wanting to know if they will get a bestseller rather than, did I write a beautiful sentence? Did I write a really beautiful sentence? I mean, when you look at the great literary masters and geniuses of the world, especially it always blows my mind that someone like Dostoevsky didn't have a word processor. Right. I mean, these guys, no. it blows my mind. Yeah. And yet sometimes you just read a sentence of great, and I'm sure you feel that way as a musician. Beethoven, like just one phrase, and you're like, I can't even. When I hear you speak and when I look at what you've done with your life, you know where my mind goes? He probably had a really good mother.
Well, I did, and I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have some things that are aligned correctly that usually comes from childhood. Just like some people who have a harder time, their wounding usually comes from childhood. Buckminster Fuller, when he was asked, what is a genius? He said somebody who had the right mother. There are some wires that simply are not crossed in you.
Yeah.
You're very fortunate. And usually that does come from some very good parenting somewhere. She must be so proud.
Well, she is. We just talked to her a couple of days ago, and she just gets smarter and wiser.
Funny how that
she
works.
really does. Yeah,
yeah. Wasn't Mark Twain talked about that?
I know. No, it's pretty cool. One of the things I do on this podcast, and it's very young, and it's podcastum. You are actually a singer. I wouldn't want to make you sing, but it can even be la da 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 da, and we could work with it. Or you could clap your hands 3 times, or you could say your favorite phrase, or
see. This is
anything.
an example. This is an example. If I was younger and if I had more anonymity, I would sing you a song that I wrote many years ago when I wrote songs. But see, now they could put it on the internet and make it all, So you lose something when you lose that.
But you got a collaborator. I can take a phrase from that.
Well, no, I won't give you a phrase from something else. How about Only Love is Real? That's what she came up with.
You got a melody for me?
No, that would be your part.
Yeah, but does anything just come out of the ether? Only love is real.
No, because then you're going back to my fear of if I were to, I could just see it going viral. Marianne appearing ridiculous, singing "Only Love Is Real." So I guess that is my fear. It's interesting, isn't it?
Okay, well, what if I'm going to negotiate now? What if
it's not going to happen?
We can cut it out.
Not going to happen.
And if I said it's not going to happen,
not going to happen.
That's
everything
awesome.
Okay. I know. I had to sacrifice that level of spontaneity.
No, but this is good because, I think one of the really helpful things for people, as well as being told all all the wisdom and all the things that we can do is also just showing the vulnerability every once in a while. And you're not going to do that, and I respect it. That's cool. Your singing career, I know you don't call it a career, but your singing phase, that must have been in your 20s.
Yes, it was my 20s, and I learned pretty quickly that I was better at the in-between patter.
Yeah.
I was better, I can sing, but I can't sing. I mean, I'm not like professional grade, But what I learned was a lot from that period, because I learned how to be on stage and talk to an audience and what matters. And, when I was in high school, I had a drama teacher named Cecil Pickett. And Cecil Pickett, the people who went through his drama classes in that high school in Houston, Texas, at Bel Air High School, Brent Spiner from the Star Trek movies, Randy and Dennis Quaid, Tommy Schlamme, many very well-known performers, writers, directors. And I was the only one who came out of it and didn't go into that kind of a career. But what he taught us relates as more to what I went on to do as to what they went on to do. And this is what he said. If there's one person in the audience, or there are 5,000 people in the audience, give your all for that audience. Show up fully. That was another thing I learned when I was younger. I used to go hear singers where they would look around the room and it was like there aren't enough people here for me to be interested. I'm thinking, oh, what am I, a chopped liver? I'm here.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's so important to remember, especially when when your ego's invested in the optics of it and your career, and you look out and say there are 5,000 people, and it seems that 3,000 of them are talking. That's a den.
You build your house on rock, or you can build your house on sand. Because if you build your house on sand, the winds are going to come, the rains are going to come, it's going to be blown away. If you build your house on rock, your house remains firm. If you build your house on sand, it means what other people think and how other people judge you and what other people are going to say, and whether or not you make a bestseller list, whether or not you make the charts. And then even if you make them, then the very next day you'll be back in anxiety because what if you don't make it next time? That's your house built on sand. If your house is built on rock, you know who you are, you know why you're doing it.
While the kids are improving on a lot of stuff, the one thing I wish we could teach them a little bit more is that while you're in your take no prisoners stance on social change, maybe working a little redemption in there.
Not just redemption,
nice.
Not just redemption, and not just a little bit.
Empathy.
No, what I'm thinking of is history and historical understanding. You were not the first people who broke the fucking chains that came before you. There were abolitionists in this country. There were women suffragettes in this country. There were civil rights workers in this country. This is not, and I think you really miss out when you don't see, particularly I think in the area of social justice, you miss out when you don't realize that you're part of a legacy that started way before you. And if anything, we are not the first generation to have suffered through many of these forces that are just reiterating all the time, but also other generations, it could be argued, rose to the challenge more than we yet have risen to the challenge. So I think when you say we need to teach them a little bit more, I think we need to teach a lot more. Just like when you've talked about arts education, the same forces of this focus on science and math and technology and engineering in school, that was at the expense of the humanities. It was at the expense of arts education. It was at the expense of learning history. It was too often at the expense of learning about government and civics. And I think we both agree, and many people would agree, we are horribly wounded by this because it has left a huge gap in our souls. It has left a gap in our social functioning. It has left a gap in the knowledge that we need in order to take the society further if you don't know what came before. It's just like when you go to therapy. You want to know, well, I want to know about my parents. I want to know about my grandparents.
Right.
And I think we need more than just a little more. We need a lot more historical understanding.
You want to give me, say 3 inflections of speaking your line that I'm going to make a song from?
Only love is real. Only love is real. Only love is real. How'd I do?
We got it.
Yeah, we
That's
should do
gonna
this
be
stuff for a
awesome.
living, you and I.
I know. I'll send you the rough mix. You can see how you like it. Thanks a lot for coming on, spending your time.
It was delightful. It was delightful to talk to you, and I'm so glad we had a chance. Thank you. I'm honored to have been on your program.
All right, on. Okay, well, we'll stay safe and inspiring, and we'll catch you on the flip side whenever I get back to the US of A.
God bless you, honey. Have a wonderful time.
All right, cheers. Bye-bye.
If I was younger and if I had more anonymity, I would sing you a song that I wrote many years ago. But see now, no, I had to sacrifice that. Only love is real. Only love is real. If you build your house on sand, it's going to be blown away. If you build your house on rock, your house remains firm. And if each and every one of us on any given day, only love is real, says, I'll do what I can. I'll do what I can. Only love is real. Then we'll make it. And if enough of us don't, we might not. We need to now create the largest social, spiritual, and political revolution in the history of the world. Only love is real. Only love is real. Only love is real. Is real. How'd I do?
Hi, if you're enjoying listening to Lightning Bugs, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot.